Good afternoon. My name is Gayla King, and I'm a member here at Buena Vista United Methodist Church. I'm very honored to welcome you here to this special program on Executive Order 9066. The 58th annual Spring Bazaar is dedicated to this, to commemorate the founding roots and legacy of this church. And we have a very wonderful program to share with you. So the program will spread over the next couple of hours in 3 sessions. You will be hearing about different aspects of how sanctuary is a very meaningful concept here in Buena Vista. We are in the sanctuary. It's a sacred space. The church was founded by being a spiritual and social sanctuary for early Japanese immigrants who were here facing discrimination, segregation, eventually internment. And throughout the life of our church, we've continued in the same vein of providing a sanctuary, being a sanctuary for many communities that are targeted even today. So this first session, we were going to be hearing personal reflections from members of our community who were personally impacted by Executive Order 9066 and under the theme of Remembrance. Then we'll have a short break, and at 2 o'clock we will reconvene, and we'll be hearing about redress and the pursuit of justice with another panel. And then after another break at 3 o'clock, we will be hearing and reflecting about the resilience of communities, both within our church historically as well as today. So thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Wendy Hanamura.
Thank you, Gayla. My name is Wendy Hanamura, and I want to welcome you to this very hallowed ground. For 119 years, the Buena Vista United Methodist Church has sat on this spot in Alameda, and it has always, always been a place of sanctuary. I see so many representatives of families from the earliest days. We have Mizoguchis and Tsuchiyas and Takedas and Itaharas and Yoshinos and Tomidas in the house. These are the names that walked the blocks of Japantown and Alameda 100 years ago. 100 years ago. And we're here today because 75 years ago, a different president signed a different executive order, sending 112,000 Japanese Americans turning their lives upside down. We're very lucky to have 3 of the living links to that executive order with us today. I want to introduce them to you. I've known them my whole lives, especially this woman, who's my mother. This is Mary Tsuchiya Hanamura. Mary was 14 years old when Executive Order 9066 was signed in Alameda, and she's going to tell you what happened to her and her family. Sitting next to her is Judy Takeda Furichi. She was the first baby born in the Topaz New Hospital behind barbed wire. She was born behind barbed wire in 1943. And sitting next to her is Joe Takeda Takata. Joe is slightly younger than Judy, just a couple of years, and she too was born behind barbed wire in a camp called Topaz outside of Delta, Utah. We begin today with personal memories because movements are always started when one person shares their personal story with another. So I want to turn it over to Joe.
Okay. For the slide. Let me just get adjusted here. Well, you know, Wendy said we're talking about how we got to camp and the history of immigration, but she said that Judy was the first person born in the new hospital, and when I got there, I was just a twinkle in my dad's eye, if you know what I mean. My parents had 3 children in Topaz in 3 years, so we're all 13 months apart. I'm very honored to be able to share some of our experiences with you. I'm going to, since I was not alive yet, just that twinkle. I'm going to start by talking about the history of the church and then a little bit about the immigration process that affected all of the Japanese immigrants here in Alameda. I'd like to begin with a quote from a Japanese poet. His name was Ichiyo, and he said, "Spacious skies, I came to America overblown with hope." And to me, it says a lot because if you think about it, most of the immigrants who came here had that feeling. They came here looking for different things, but they were overblown with hope. And today, I'll talk a little bit about how they fared through that. So I don't know how this works. Oh, this one. Sorry. Oh boy.
There you go.
Okay. Now, this picture, I chose this picture because I wanted to start back in why the Japanese Americans first came. This is a picture of some of the former samurai in Japan who had lost their positions and were part of the new constitutional government of Japan. And they are looking at plans that were put out by the government. You know, after the revolution, the whole economic and political situation in Japan was turned upside down. Japan wanted to join all the Western and European states and modernize. So they raised taxes, and at the same time there was a rice shortage, and so all these people didn't have anywhere to go. So that's what they're looking at. They're looking at what should we do? You remember that in the United States, the Chinese, or in California, the Chinese came first in the 1850s searching for the gold and helping to build the railroads. And they faced so much prejudice. They were spit upon, called names, their hair was pulled. You can imagine, because they had a different, the Asians looked different, they couldn't speak English, so they were really treated with hatred. And later we'll see jealousy and envy. What happened in the 1880s, the very same time that the Chinese Immigration Act was enacted, the first mention of a Japanese was made in the Alameda paper. His name was Kunio Yanigawa, and he was the son of a diplomat. There was also a name of another Japanese who went to the police station and wanted to apply to become a police in Alameda. Of course, they didn't let him because at that time, because of the Immigration Act or Naturalization Act of way back in 1870, people who were not born here were not considered citizens or never allowed to enjoy the constitutional rights that all white people were able to enjoy. So that's what this is. These are the men who answered the call. The Chinese Exclusion Act forbade Chinese from entering, and the United States needed more workers, and so they called on people from Japan. One thing I like to say, though, about Japan is they didn't want to send any riffraff or degenerates, you know. They wanted to send people that would represent Japan. So they made review boards that checked the health and made sure that everyone who immigrated had at least 8 years of schooling. I thought that was an interesting beginning, so we can assume that most of the people who came here were educated and not riffraff. You know what I mean. Okay. I know. All right. I'm going to hit this one. So in the early days of Alameda, I won't say thousands came yet, because in 1910 there were only 37 1900, there were only 37 Japanese in Alameda. And in 10 years, it boomed up to 110. And these people came in with the same hopes of finding gold lining the streets and all that. But they worked hard to establish businesses because they couldn't have their laundry done or get haircuts or anything, eat in Caucasian restaurants. So they made their own. And let me see where I am. Oops, sorry. Here's some. Oh, this one is the beginning in men in front of a laundry on Park Street, and here are some little boys who are sitting in front of a laundry and press cleaning shop. And I'm not sure if this is the Yoshino one, but I want to talk for the whole hour, but I can't. So talk to me later. But you know, just as the Chinese faced discrimination, so did the Japanese. You know, Japanese worked hard, even though they were poor. They were willing to work long hours for very little money. And so because of the competition, Japanese were not even allowed, were asked to not be allowed into the public schools. And here's something from the Chronicle in 1905 or 1906. Right in here we are. This is Buena Vista. Anyway, here's the church, but right around the corner here on Park Street is where the Japantown began, and all the businesses formed along this street and across the street. Barber shops, tailor shops, laundry, shoe repair, things like that. But our church began on a cold, foggy night at right above Kobeya. Some of you know that restaurant here in Alameda, where two missionary wives wanted to teach English to their Japanese. And I say that kernel of goodness that began with those two missionary wives were the beginning of our church. They wanted to teach English because they wanted Japanese to be able to read the Bible, of course. And so it also provided a haven, a refuge, a sanctuary for these lonely people who were coming to a strange new world. Imagine coming to a country that you had never only heard that gold was hanging on the trees. You know, gold was hanging on the trees, and that was a big pull for people to come, but they found quite the opposite. Well, the school started with 4 people, and it boomed, grew over 20, and then they needed more space, and eventually, as they needed even more space, a missionary left $6,500 to buy this house that was here, and it was the beginning of the Buena Vista United Methodist Church. Oh, this is the second, as they outgrew that home room above the Kobeya, this was a home on Eagle around the corner that they had more schools. Then as I'm trying to show that more and more people were coming and settling in Alameda, and so in 1911, this brown shingle building was built behind the church where the offices are now. Chapel was upstairs. Imagine all the Issei walking to the church with their Bibles under their arms. Well, even the Japanese, like the Chinese, were envied and hated because they were so hardworking and efficient and succeeded. So in 1907, the United States government and U.S. had a gentleman's agreement saying that only people from only merchants, diplomats, and students could come from Japan, but they left a loophole saying, leaving out, they didn't say women or wives couldn't come. So what happened? Alameda was kind of a wild, wild west, and picture brides came. And you know, these picture brides got married to the men who were living in this wild, wild west atmosphere, and tamed the atmosphere in Alameda. Families babies were born, and they became the second generation. I'll skip that. They all come here to line their pockets with gold and then go home, but that didn't happen, did it? No, they stayed, and when they decided to stay, they started having children, of course. This is a picture of one of the early Sunday schools. I think it's the earliest Sunday school, but look at the children. These would be the second generation, or the Nisei. Here's some more, and these are on the front porch of the church. And then the church had church picnics and parties and Halloween parties, plays, and all kinds of things for people to enjoy. Here's a picture. It's after the resettlement, but it's the 50th anniversary of our church. And that was the old hall that people bought, the church bought. I'm running out of time, and I have so much more to tell you. But what I wanted to tell you, talking about sanctuary, is the thing I'm trying to let you know or tell you or reinforce is that prejudice and racism and hatred is, maybe we can say it's a part of our human nature. I don't know. I know that jealousy and envy is a big part that drives people to have wars. Even in our families, we fight over this and that, right? But the resentment that built against the Japanese started this movement, a yellow peril, that after Pearl Harbor was bombed, people thought that the Japanese were going to drop bombs on California, submarines were going to blow up our coasts. And so the 9066, the evacuation order, was put out by President Roosevelt. And I'm showing this one, and I'm leaving a lot out, but it's all out there on display and timelines. This is a picture of our church members, Anna and Johnny Tawada, and I'm showing this picture because they got married on May the 3rd. And they had to leave for pack up and take everything little they could to camp at 2 days later. And so they were sent to Tanforan, which many of you know was a horse racetrack, and some of you know have been there. Here's what they came to: horse stalls. And my dad found a hay hook and a horseshoe, which I forgot to bring, but it's very poignant that they spent their honeymoon in a horse stable. Here's how they arrived, but I want you to notice how dignified they are with their hats and coats. It was windy and it was rainy that day in May. And after 3 months, they were told to board these trains with their belongings, and they were told they were going somewhere. And I wanted to let Mary pick up from there, because somewhere they went is where Mary is going to talk about the internment camps. You want this? I do.
Thank you. What's so wonderful about the story that you're hearing is that it really isn't a distant story. It's all of your stories. I understand that there's a Mashihara in the house. Well, the Mashihara, a couple pictures ago, were your great-grandparents the day that Mr. Aoyagi arrived, and it was a big welcome party. And speckled throughout these photographs are Yoshinos and Mizuguchis and Takedas, and we could show them who you are because this is your story. And these are sacred objects to us. Back here are the actual suitcases that our church members took with them to Tanforan and Topaz and Tule Lake. The one that's open is monogrammed EA. That is for Eli Akamatsu. And while there, she married and met the dashing Kinomura. Mm-hmm. These duffel bags, which carried a lot more things, are the Ozeki duffel bags. Keyatabe, their daughter and their granddaughter, is here. This is a table that countless church members drank tea that sat in Nellie Takeda's kitchen for decades and decades. So these are our priceless reminders of an executive order that turned our lives upside down. I want to turn this over to my mother. I'm here to be her supporter because she hates speaking in public. But Mom, this is you when you were a teenager, perhaps, and your mother, Miano Tuchia, your brother, George Tuchia, and the younger brother, Arn Tuchia. Now, you were born into the Buddhist church and a member of the Buddhist church, but many of your best friends were members of this church. Who were your best friends?
Toshiko, Aoyagi, Tomita.
Here's Toshiko.
Yeah.
Here you are with Mary Yamanaka.
And we did everything together.
What kinds of things did you do together?
Well, we started playing jacks and jump rope as small children and climbed trees, we were in the land of Oz. Let's see.
Take us back to 1942 when they issued Executive Order 9066. You were only 14 years old, but do you remember how your parents felt?
Yes, I remember coming home one day, and in my kitchen, Mrs. Aoyagi and Mrs. Iwamasa and my mother were crying. They were afraid of the future. They didn't know what was going to happen, where we would be sent. They didn't know whether families would be separated, whether all the women would go to one place and the men and the other children, and they didn't know what to expect. There's a lot of fear.
So you had to leave your school, and in fact, Alameda, which had a naval air station, it was marked as Zone A, so Alamedans had to leave their homes even before everyone else. Where did you go?
My mother and I went to San Francisco to stay with friends on Pine Street near Japantown. And shortly after that, the Yamanakas and Koikes urged us to come to Sacramento and stay in the same house with them so that we would be sent to the same place. So that's what we did.
So the Yamanakas, the Koikes, I think there's some Koikes in the house today, and the Tuchias, they all moved together to Sacramento because you didn't know where you were going to be taken.
That's right.
And you wanted to end up together.
Yes.
But that meant you were separated from your other good friend, Toshiko Aoyagi.
Yes, she went to Berkeley to be near her grandmother.
So you didn't know if you'd see her again.
Yes, I didn't know whether I would ever see her again.
So tell us what happened from Sacramento. You were taken to an assembly center, euphemistically called an assembly center, called Lerga.
We were sent to the Walerga Assembly Center in Sacramento, and it was a hastily constructed camp, barracks. The floorboards did not come together. There were tall weeds growing into the room. A single light bulb was hanging from the ceiling. The walls did not reach the ceilings. We could hear next door neighbors, and they could hear us.
But the worst thing for you was what?
Oh, the latrines. There were no flush toilets there. And the latrines were built in the fire breaks. And what they were large pits covered with a platform with oval-shaped holes along the outer edges, and no partitions. We would have to sit next to each other. It was really terrible.
In fact, though, there were acts of heroism. Tell us about one man you remember.
Yes, there was a very dedicated Issei man who would go around to the different latrines dressed with a can of disinfectant and a pole with a rag nailed to the end of it. And he would dip the rag into the disinfectant and try to disinfect the wooden platforms so that there would not be a lot of infection. There was always a lot of, there was a danger of
mass outbreak of infection and disease.
Right. And we had to stand in long lines getting shots for all kinds of things.
Now, you were just a 14-year-old girl with your best friend, Mary Yamanaka, and to take a shower, there were no partitions for the showers either, right?
Right. The shower was a one single open room with shower heads coming from the ceiling. And we were both very bashful, so we would wait until everyone else had cleared out of the shower room, and we would go with each other and stand guard for each other. And if anyone was coming, we'd say, "Quick, someone's coming." And the one taking a shower would quickly wrap a towel around. But yeah, it was.
Now, you went during this period to 5 high schools: Alameda High School, Sacramento High School, Walerga High School, and then finally Topaz High School. Tule Lake High School.
And then
Topaz High School.
Moved around a lot.
Must have been very disconcerting to be uprooted after a few months.
It was. It was very. We left everything familiar behind, and we didn't know what to expect. It was very difficult.
So you, the Koikes, the Yamanakas, you landed in Tule Lake. And at a certain point, our government decided that there are good apples and bad apples in the Japanese American community. And they were going to sort between the good ones and the bad ones. So they gave everyone a loyalty oath. Tell us what happened next.
Well, Tule Lake was designated as the place for so-called disloyal people. And so the loyal people were sent to other camps, and we were sent to Topaz.
Yeah, it was a very heated time, right?
It was. There was a lot of anger and
Some violence.
violence, yes.
Japanese setting upon other Japanese Americans.
Right, right.
So you were one of the last to leave Tule Lake, one of the last yes families to leave.
Yes.
What happened then?
We were on the last train leaving with the loyal party because my brother got sick in Tule Lake and had to have an operation. He had a kidney removed. And so we were in the last group leaving, and they were afraid we might be attacked, so they sent a jeep, an army jeep with armed guards to get us out of there. But our neighbors are very fond of my mother, and so instead of being against, they helped us actually get packed and to leave.
So from Tule Lake, which is in California, you were sent by train to this camp outside of Delta, Utah, Topaz, euphemistically called Topaz Internment Camp or Relocation Camp, but we today call it a concentration camp, where at certain points between 8,000 and 12,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated. So here you are, arriving November 13th, 1943, at the age of 15, and you were in Block 14-4D, which turns out to be lucky because it was quite close to the Topaz Hospital where Judy was born. And there were a lot of your friends there. Who were these folks?
Oh, I see Mrs. Koike, Mr. and Mrs. Koike, I see Mrs. Aoyagi, I see Mr. Iwamasa.
The Yoshinos. So these were the cooks from Alameda. They were Alameda citizens who their job was to cook in the mess halls. And so they were all together again. It was a great reunion, wasn't it, to see your old friends?
Yes.
Great behind barbed wire. And there was the hospital. Tell us about your work in the hospital.
Well, there was a bad shortage of nurses, so they would take teenagers, and we would just be trained on the spot to give shots, help with treatments, and
although they called you nurses' aides, in fact, you were treated like nurses, weren't you?
yes, quite often I would be the only one on the ward, especially at night when everyone was sleeping. Yeah. So it was quiet at night, except occasionally there would be emergencies, and we would be called upon to help in the treatment room. It was
Tell
really
us
scary.
about that one emergency.
Well, I was on the obstetrics ward, and one of the new mothers started to bleed because the baby had torn something on the way out. This was in the middle of the night, and she was way at the other end of the ward. There was only one telephone on the whole ward by the desk. But her roommate rushed down, ran to me and said, come quick, come quick. And I did, and the whole bed was covered with blood. So I ran back, tried to get someone, and a doctor finally came, went into the treatment room, and there weren't enough people to help, so they had me administered the anesthetic.
Now, when you say anesthetic, though,
You know, it was very crude. It was ether, and they had this embroidery, what do they call those circle things, with a gauze stretched across it, and that was placed over her nose, and they instructed me to drip the ether at a certain pace, and that was the anesthesia.
so we have 3 babies. There's Kent, Joe, and Judy born in that same hospital, but we know now that, you know, they're lucky to have been born healthily because it was
Yes.
very poor conditions.
Yes.
The only doctors they had were Japanese-American doctors. The only nurses they had were high school kids like my mother. And then there was Arn. Tell us why you were actually working in the hospital.
Well, he was well when we first went to camp, but while in Tule Lake, he developed tuberculosis of the kidney, and they had to remove one of his kidneys. And in Topaz, he was in the tuberculosis ward, and a lot of nurses' aides wouldn't work there, but I volunteered to work there.
Tuberculosis was the AIDS of the 40s, right? People didn't
Right.
know what had caused it. There was a lot of stigma
Yeah.
involved.
There was no cure for it,
Right.
except bed rest.
Right. So here are the doctors who served. And meanwhile, you were going to high school, at Topaz High School. Tell us a little bit about the people who were your teachers, like Dave Tatsuno, and what it was like being in high school and in a camp.
Well, we made a lot of good friends, became very close friends. The Japanese teachers were recruited from among the college students, and some of the white teachers were recruited from outside. And I always gave them a lot of credit because they gave up their comfortable lives outside of camp and came to teach us.
Indeed. Emil Sekarek was, I believe, Jane, tell me if I'm wrong, I think he was a conscientious objector, so his penance was to come into camp and serve as a teacher. Dave Tatsuno's movie you can see in the other room. And here is your graduation ceremony. And there, I don't think you can see her, but my mother is actually sitting right here. And they said in your yearbook, as your senior prophecy, Mary Tuccia, the sweet little gal, for the last 10 years has been at Cal. But that is not what happened.
No.
What happened?
Came out, my mother was widowed, and it was, people helped each other back then, and families would loan each other money, and she had a lot of debt. So I went to work and helped her repay the debt.
And yet, there's so much hope in your high school yearbook. I pulled this out. Farewell to your alma mater, farewell to friends so true. Throughout our lives, we'll ever carry fondest memories of you. Did you stay in touch with your Topaz High School class of 45?
Yes, we had many class reunions, and we were always so happy to see each other. People would come from far and wide. It was wonderful. Yeah.
Here you are back in Berkeley, where you returned in 1945. I should say you turned down a few scholarships to college. You were offered a full ride at Swarthmore, at Reed, but instead you came to Berkeley, where you lived in the projects with
Ron,
Ron's-
baby Ron.
baby Ron and his father, and you worked as a maid, didn't you? Your grandmother was a cook. My
Yes.
grandmother was a cook, and what did you do?
Well, I worked in the daytime. I had a clerical job at the American Red Cross office, and at night I would go back home where my mother was, and I would wait on the table. She was the cook.
So Alamedans started to come back. They lived in housing projects. They lived wherever they could. They lived as domestics, wherever they could live.
Right.
And here is your high school class reunion, 2015. I'm going to turn this over to Judy, but I put in a few last slides because a few good things happened to my mother in Topaz. A young soldier who was injured serving our country in World War II in the 442nd came to visit his parents, Tomokichi and Yoshi Hanamura. There he dropped off some candy that George and Marie had sent with him to his mother and his sister, and they ended up getting married. The first Buddhist-Christian wedding of Alameda. They were married by Reverend Shimada, and there they are, the three of them reunited again. So that is your story. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Mary. Wow, that was so moving. Thanks, Mary, for agreeing to do this. I know it was not easy. Well, I'm Judy, and I'm the quiet one in the family. Someone a few words. So, knowing that, excuse me if I read a lot of this, because it's just, I feel more comfortable. So today I'm just going to tell a little bit about the post-war settlement. What happened to folks who returned from camp? So on December 17th, 1944, public proclamation number 21 was issued by the government, which ended the mass incarceration of 9066. And upon release, each internee was given $25 and a transportation ticket to go home. So after 3 long years of being relocated and incarcerated, families had to decide where to go and how to get there on $25. Many displaced Alamedans returned to Alameda, only to find that precious possessions, such as cars, homes, furniture, savings that had been entrusted to family or friends, families, friends, and others, had lost everything. Even upon coming home, they somehow, monies were spent, rent that was collected by rental properties were not given back. And even, in some instances where rental agencies were asked to rent out Japanese homes, they rented them but would not give the monies to the returning internees. So because of the hard feelings of Americans that remained after the war, finding jobs and finding homes were also difficult. I know here in Alameda, many were refused to sell. Many people were refused to be able to buy homes. Businesses were not available to Japanese Americans, and even obtaining home loans were hard to get. Some faced backlash from their Caucasian friends upon returning, and really outright discrimination. So re-entry into the American way of life was very challenging, to say the least. As families from Alameda returned from camp, there were instances where many were welcomed by their neighbors and old friends, and some even found housing with other returning families. There was one, the Imura family had a very large home on Pacific Avenue, and they opened their home to several different families. A few families found public housing outside of Alameda, like Mary. So the once close community, looking for support and friendship, wasn't always available. It was not available. So as in the beginning, our church, Buena Vista United Methodist, became a sanctuary all those many years ago. Upon returning, once again became a sanctuary. Just as the church did in the early days, it offered shelter, comfort, and a spiritual community. And during the war, the church buildings here, this building was not here, but the social hall was used to house, was used as a place where families like our family could leave our possessions. And when we returned, we were able to get them back. And thanks to Dr. John Cobb and his wife, Theodora, who they were appointed because they were once Japanese missionaries in Japan. They were appointed to stay at the church and safeguard all the possessions. And the Cobbs remained really close family friends with our mom and dad. So prior to the war, my parents didn't have much. It was my mom and dad and my grandmother and grandfather. But what they did have, they sold their household goods for $21. And Mom's piano, her precious piano, was sold for $5. So you have to remember that these families lost everything. They could only take what they could carry to the camps. Upon returning, our family was one of the families who found refuge and safe haven here at Buena Vista. Again, the church became a sanctuary. Our parents, Bill and Nellie, left Topaz in 1945, returned with Mom's parents, Nana and Papa, and 3 kids. Their family grew very quickly, with their 4th child on the way. In the oven, as Joe says. With no home or relatives to return to, because we were just a very small family, the church offered us a place to stay here. And Buena Vista became our home. Sachi, can you, there we go. So we showed this picture once before. This was a sanctuary, the old brown shingle, which was built where the offices are now. But our family of, well, almost 10 later on, lived in the bottom level, the 2 Sunday school rooms there. No running water. We had electricity, and there was no kitchen. So, can you show the Mary Helm Hall again, Sach? Not Mary Helm, the Victorian, I'm sorry. This one, Mary Helm. This is where several other families returned after the war, and this was the church parsonage to begin with, but again, 3 or 4 other families had to live downstairs, and we all shared 1 bathroom and 1 kitchen. So it was communal living. Fun, but communal. I remember, so you wonder, how did the Taquetas bathe? Well, if you go out and look at the exhibit, we brought back our galvanized tub, which 6 kids eventually would line up in front of the tub and with my dad, and he would begin bathing us.
She was first.
Well, we went by age. So first got their face washed, then Joe, then Kent, and so on. And eventually he would get to our toes, right? It was not easy, not easy. But, you know, we became so close to the different families that were here, and the spiritual community and the community that existed not only on the property here, but the church community became our family. And I'm not going to tell this story because my time's running out. Never mind. During the not yet, Sachi. During the time that we lived at the church, many families came and became active and revitalized the church. The Sunday school grew, and the church became the hub of a growing community again. And deep friendships continued and developed with everybody, with all families here. Finally, one quote. I remember Mom and Dad would always say to us, you know, we may not be rich with material things, but we were very rich with love and friendship.
And there's enough to go all around.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
So in 1952, our parents were able to buy a home just 3 doors away from the church. As a proxy, a friend offered to buy the home for them, as in those days, Japanese could still not buy property. Now, with 6 children and our grandparents to support, our dad had to find work wherever he could. He first began working at the produce market in Oakland, supplementing with a full schedule of gardening, and he was even the custodian of the Twin Towers United Methodist Church. And so were we. We were trained to dust every pew. We couldn't even keep the small change that was left. We had to give it back to the church. And Mom, she worked as a domestic on occasion. But this was good because that's where she learned to cook, how to set a table, how to make coffee, how to do laundry. And really, that's how she learned, and we learned from her as well. So the church, our house being very close to the church, kind of became an annex where after worship on many Sundays, our friends, our parents and our grandparents' friends would come and just gather and have a meal and have a good time. And this is where we had the many conversations around this table, our kitchen table.
Look at that.
Those, yes. So there are 2 photos of our home when we kids were young. So the Nisei generation was not afraid of work. And to their credit, many were successful in being able to provide amply for their families, despite having their lives and education turned upside down. To their credit, many of the Nisei who had to leave college finished their education, and some even received their diplomas many years later. The Issei and Nisei, with their ability to persevere during years of hardship, coming to a new land, seeking opportunities for a better life, facing the harsh realities of racism and discrimination, having to build and rebuild supportive communities. All that has provided us younger generations and generations even moving forward, because they're going to hear these stories. They've provided us with a legacy of which we can be very proud and thankful. They're strong examples of the value of hard work, perseverance, acceptance of things that they can't change, the value of education, and the strength during times of adversity. They'd encourage, any of those things would encourage all of us to be the best we can be. Japanese Americans have demonstrated courage, ingenuity, and loyalty to the highest ideals, even to the United States Constitution. Through hearing and remembering the stories, I didn't mean to look at you, Joe. Through hearing and remembering the stories,
It's not true.
we have learned and continue to learn about the many sacrifices our families and elders have made. This legacy has continued to move and inspire the younger generation to work for redress for internees, to educate the community of the hidden and unspoken history, and of the effects of the Executive Order 9066. And we are proud of our heritage. This is really quite a moving legacy for all of us, and especially the younger generation who will make sure that nothing like this happens again. And you know, when you hear the next segments from Dawn and Malia and Eddie, they're the young ones who, well, they're younger than we are.
Yeah, way younger.
They're the young ones who are just going to keep the story, the legacy alive, and just continue the hard work that needs to be done so that this never happens again. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, Mrs. Hanamura, Auntie Joe, and Auntie Judy. Can we give them another round of applause?